The Georgetown University Law Center auditorium was already tense before anyone took the stage. Not chaotic, not loud, just tense in the way that happens when everyone in the room knows something might go wrong, and no one's sure who will pull the trigger. Denzel Washington and Justice Brett Kavanaugh were scheduled to participate in a panel discussion about justice and morality in American society. It had been pitched as a thoughtful conversation between a Hollywood icon known for portraying moral complexity and a Supreme Court justice. But that was just the version the public saw. Behind the scenes, there were emails, conditions, and warnings. Denzel Washington had only agreed to appear if the discussion remained focused on broader themes of justice, not political controversies. The organizers had agreed, or at least they said they had. But just minutes before they walked onto the stage, one of the moderators was overheard saying, "Let's see if we can get some fireworks between them." And Denzel's longtime friend on the faculty heard every word. When they finally took their seats on stage, the applause was polite but cautious. The audience, mostly law students, faculty, and older donors, sensed the underlying tension. Denzel sat with his characteristic calm dignity. Kavanaugh appeared slightly nervous, adjusting his tie repeatedly. The moderator, a 70-year-old retired federal judge, began with introductions. Tonight we explore how justice is perceived and portrayed in American culture, with two men who've shaped that perception in very different ways. The first 20 minutes proceeded smoothly. They discussed legal philosophy, the role of storytelling in shaping public understanding of justice. But then the moderator shifted. "Justice Kavanaugh, how do you think Hollywood's portrayal of the justice system affects public trust in institutions like the Supreme Court?" Kavanaugh cleared his throat. "Well, I think sometimes Hollywood dramatizes things in ways that can undermine respect for our institutions. People need to understand that real justice is about careful deliberation, not dramatic moments." Denzel listened quietly, his expression unreadable. Kavanaugh continued, warming to his theme. "Take Mr. Washington's films, for example. They often show justice as something personal, emotional. But real justice requires setting aside emotion, being impartial, having the character too." Character? Denzel's single word cut through the room like a blade. The audience shifted in their seats. Kavanaugh stopped mid-sentence. Denzel leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, but carrying unmistakable weight. "You want to lecture this room about character?" The moderator tried to intervene. "Gentlemen, let's keep this." But Denzel wasn't finished. He stood slowly, commanding the room with his presence. "Justice Kavanaugh speaks of character, of impartiality, of setting aside emotion." He paused, looking directly at Kavanaugh. "Tell me, Justice, when you wept during your confirmation hearing, when you raged about your love of beer, when you shouted about conspiracies, was that the impartial character you're describing?" The audience gasped. Kavanaugh's face flushed red. "That was different," Kavanaugh stammered. "I was under attack." "So emotion is acceptable when you're under scrutiny," Denzel said quietly. "But not when seeking justice for others?" Interesting standard. Now, before we witness what happened next in this explosive confrontation, I need to tell you something. What you're about to see is exactly why the establishment doesn't want you to know these moments exist. They bury them, edit them, pretend they never happened. But we're here, exposing the truth they desperately want hidden. If you believe in real, unfiltered truth, if you're tired of being fed sanitized versions of events, then hit that subscribe button right now. Don't wait until the end, because what's coming next will blow your mind. Subscribe now, and join the thousands who refuse to be lied to anymore. Trust me, after you see what Denzel does next, you'll understand why they tried so hard to make this disappear. Denzel turned to address the audience, many of whom were older citizens who'd lived through the contentious confirmation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're told to respect institutions. I do respect them, but respect doesn't mean blindness. It doesn't mean pretending that everyone who holds high office deserves to lecture others about character." Kavanaugh tried to regain his footing. Mr. Washington, you're taking things out of context. Context. Denzel turned back to him. The context is that you sit on the highest court in the land. You make decisions that affect millions. And you want to tell me that Hollywood undermines trust in institutions. He paused, his voice dropping but still audible throughout the room. Sir, you undermine that trust all by yourself. The silence was deafening. Several older audience members nodded knowingly. The moderator desperately tried to restore order. Perhaps we should return to the broader themes. No, Denzel said firmly. We're discussing justice and morality. Well, here's a moral question. How can someone who showed such lack of judicial temperament lecture anyone about the proper portrayal of justice? Kavanaugh's voice rose defensively. I've served with distinction. Have you? Denzel's question hung in the air. Or have you served with the constant shadow of doubt that comes from how you achieved your position? He addressed the audience again. I've played judges, lawyers, officers of the court. I researched each role extensively. You know what every good judge told me. That temperament matters. That character matters. That how you handle pressure reveals who you are. An elderly woman in the audience called out. Tell him, Denzel. Kavanaugh stood now, shaking with anger. You have no right. I have every right, Denzel interrupted calmly. As a citizen, as someone who spent 40 years showing America what justice should look like, as someone who believes the highest court in our land should be occupied by those with the highest character. He looked Kavanaugh directly in the eyes. You spoke of my films showing justice as personal and emotional. You're right. Because justice is personal to those seeking it. It is emotional to those denied it. The fact that you don't understand that tells me everything about why trust in your institution is at an all-time low. Kavanaugh's face was purple. This is an ambush. No, Denzel said simply. This is accountability. Something you've avoided since the day you were confirmed. The moderator stood. I think we should take a break. I think we're done, Denzel said. He turned to the audience one last time. To the law students here, remember that holding high office doesn't exempt you from moral scrutiny. If anything, it invites it. And to everyone else, you deserve justices who embody justice, not just enforce it. He began walking off stage, then stopped and delivered the line that would echo through history. Justice Kavanaugh, you asked how Hollywood affects trust in the Supreme Court. Here's your answer. We don't need to dramatize anything. You've provided all the drama and disappointment America needs. He walked off to thunderous applause, leaving Kavanaugh standing alone on stage, humiliated and speechless. What happened next sent shockwaves through both legal and entertainment circles. After Denzel's exit, the auditorium remained in chaos. Kavanaugh stood frozen on stage for several moments before abruptly leaving in the opposite direction. The audience was on its feet, most applauding, some in shocked silence, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. The moderator attempted to close the event. Well, that was unexpected. Thank you all for. Unexpected. An elderly man stood up. That was overdue. Someone finally said what millions of us have been thinking since those hearings. Others joined in. Denzel spoke truth to power. About time someone called him out. Character matters. Within an hour, footage of the confrontation was everywhere. Hashtag Denzel Speaks Truth and hashtag Character Matters began trending among older social media users who remembered the confirmation hearings vividly. Denzel released a brief statement through his publicist. I attended tonight intending to discuss justice in America. I did exactly that. Sometimes truth is uncomfortable, but comfort has never been a requirement for justice. The legal community erupted in debate. Retired judges and legal scholars weighed in. Former Justice John Paul Stevens' biographer released an old quote. The court's legitimacy depends not just on legal reasoning, but on public faith in the character of its members. Once that faith is shaken, it's nearly impossible to restore. Kavanaugh, through the Supreme Court's Public Information Office, released a terse statement about the inappropriate nature of personal attacks and declined further comment. But the real impact came from ordinary Americans, particularly older citizens who'd watched the confirmation hearings. A 72-year-old retired teacher from Ohio wrote, "I watched those hearings. I saw a man who couldn't control his temper demand a lifetime appointment. Tonight, Denzel Washington said what the Senate should have said: character matters." A Vietnam veteran posted, "I've served under pressure. Real pressure. Watching Kavanaugh crack under questioning, then get rewarded with the Supreme Court broke my heart." Denzel restored some faith that people still value temperament. Within days, law schools across the country began incorporating the confrontation into discussions about judicial temperament and public trust. Georgetown law itself was forced to address the incident. The dean released a careful statement about the importance of civil discourse, while acknowledging legitimate questions about institutional credibility. More significantly, polls showed that trust in the Supreme Court, already at historic lows, dropped further. Legal analysts noted that Denzel had crystallized what many Americans felt but couldn't articulate. 3 months later, at a legal conference, retired Justice David Souter broke his usual silence to comment obliquely on the incident. When someone outside the legal profession can so effectively articulate the crisis of credibility facing our highest court, perhaps it's time for those within the profession to engage in serious self-reflection. Denzel, meanwhile, received thousands of letters from older Americans thanking him for his courage. One particularly moving letter from an 80-year-old retired judge read, "Mr. Washington, I spent my career believing in the nobility of our legal system. The Kavanaugh confirmation shook that belief. Tonight, you reminded me that citizens have not just the right but the duty to demand better from those who serve. Thank you for your courage." The confrontation had lasting effects. Law schools began placing greater emphasis on judicial temperament in their curricula. Bar associations hosted panels on character and the bench. Kavanaugh himself seemed affected. Court observers noted he became more subdued in oral arguments, less likely to show the combative side that had concerned many during his confirmation. A year later, Denzel was asked about the incident in a rare interview. "I've played many roles," he said, "but that night, I wasn't playing anyone. I was just a citizen who'd had enough." Sometimes the most important lines aren't in scripts. They're the ones that need to be said when everyone else is too polite to say them. When asked if he regretted the confrontation, he was clear. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that someone on our highest court made it necessary. But I don't regret speaking truth. At my age, I've learned that respectability is less important than responsibility." The Georgetown incident became a watershed moment in discussions about institutional credibility. It showed that Americans, particularly older Americans who remembered when institutions commanded natural respect, would no longer automatically defer to office holders who didn't embody the dignity of their offices. Denzel Washington hadn't just humiliated Brett Kavanaugh with a single line. He'd articulated what millions felt: that character still matters, that temperament still counts, and that no robe or title exempts anyone from those basic standards. In an era when trust in institutions was crumbling, one actor's willingness to speak uncomfortable truths had reminded America that respect must be earned, not just expected. And sometimes, the most patriotic act is refusing to pretend that the emperor is wearing clothes when everyone can see he's not. The truth may have been uncomfortable, but as Denzel showed that night, comfort was never a requirement for justice. Only courage was. And courage, unlike appointments, can't be granted by politicians. It must come from within.